Hey guys, it's Leila from Ignite and I'm here with Jonny.
What up, guys?
And in today's video, we'll be addressing the best way to approach Module A, which is on Textual Conversations.
And before we get into that, please do check out our website, ignitehsc.com.au. That is our online HSC English resource platform. I think you'll find lots of great material to help you get through the HSC on there. But for now, let's get into it.
Like I said, based on textual conversations. I'm just going to start us off by addressing how I usually tell my students to start off with this module and the conceptual framework that you really want to apply. So the first thing to address is if you're moving on from human experience, right, the common module, which is where you're looking at a text to give an insight to the notion of human experience and everything that entails. With Module A, you're switching and you're looking at the relationship between two texts and how that relationship implicates what we call the shaping of meaning within texts. So the question that you're essentially asking yourself in Module A is, if I had not studied these texts comparatively, would I come to the same understanding that I now have of those texts? So contrasting from human experience, you're not looking at one text to better understand one certain idea, but it's rather this negotiation of meanings between two texts. So you may look at a certain thematic basis, you may look at an idea between two texts, but you're essentially asking yourself how your understanding of that certain idea has been challenged or enhanced or shaped through a comparison to an external text. So that's what you want to start with. We're looking at a conversation and how that conversation constantly rechanges and enhances our understanding of the ideas that are conveyed within each of these texts.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at how this actually manifests in an essay structure, because many students will actually forget to recognize throughout the essay, to actually articulate that you are dealing with a conversation, that you are looking at these two texts as a package, and you're looking at almost a third text, right? You have one text, the second text, and then this kind of third text of meaning, which is created through the interplay of those two individual texts.
Which is what we really call intertextuality, yeah? Which
Exactly.
is the idea on which this module is really premised. This notion that there is no singular or finite way of construing meaning within a text, but rather that meaning is built through one text relationality to another text. So if you're looking at Tempest and Hagseed, you're asking yourself, okay, now that you've looked at this set text and you're comparing it to an external text, how have those ideas been developed through you engaging with these two texts in this intertextual conversation? And that's what you want to be addressing in your essay.
That's right, and if you're doing something like the Tempest and Hagseed, it's good to recognize that the first text to be released, to be published, in that case the Tempest, is what you'd call the source text, right? It is the source, and then the latter text, in this case Hagseed, is the adapted text. And if you look at the source text and then look at the adapted text, you are no longer going to look at the source text the same way. That's the idea. You have another text, and just by reading it, just by consuming that material, you are now going to understand the source text, the original text, differently. And then also looking back at the original text, you're going to look at that latter text, the adapted text, differently as well.
Yeah, and I think intertextuality also functions in this reciprocal sense, because that adapted text really does rely on the source text, or rather its reader's understanding of that source text for meaning to be unlocked, right? So not only is your understanding of Hagseed premised on the Tempest, and the Tempest's understanding is reshaped through Hagseed, but Atwood actually relies on you knowing what the Tempest is, what it's about, the history behind the composition, for you to fully appreciate what goes on in Hagseed.
Yeah, that's right. And it's very interesting when you look at the texts that have been chosen as the prescribed texts for this new syllabus, Tempest, Hagseed, other texts like Plath and Hughes.
Yes.
There often is a very direct conversation going on. It's very direct. Other texts you might not be so direct, but it seems that a lot of the prescribed pairs of texts that have been chosen, one author is very cognizant, they're very aware of themselves talking to that prior author, that prior text, and which is actually important in how meaning is shaped.
Yeah.
It's not incidental, they're not just happening to be commenting or appropriating some original text. They are actually directly trying to draw your attention to an original text, but in a creative and innovative way often, and actually reshape your understanding of what you may have previously understood just from looking at the original text itself.
Yeah, so what Jonny is touching on there are some of the broader ideas that you then need to engage on in this module, and I think we might segue into that, right? So when we're looking at these two texts, yeah, of course, you'll start off by thinking about, okay, what's conveyed in terms of subject matter, what ideas come up between them, but then you start to look beyond the text and you think about, well, hang on, what was that composer's authorial intent in actually writing this text? Why was Atwood writing within the Hogarth Shakespeare project with the intent of reshaping and reviving the original text. If you're looking at Dalloway and Hours, we know that Stephen Daldry was writing to extend our understanding of the actual biographical influence of Virginia Woolf in writing about Mrs. Dalloway and how that feeds into the way she's received in different contextual lenses. So looking at authorial intent and purpose is another, I guess, concept you need to consider within this study. Moving forward from that, we also need to take into account context and how contextual lenses influence the construction of these ideas and how a lot of these ideas are enduring between the different texts. So I think authorial intent and purpose, thinking about context and also the contrasting formal modes between the texts are really important. And Jonny, why do you think considering form is really central to the Module A study?
Well, form is essential in any study, really, aside from Module A, because you should always consider the macro compositional choices of a composer and how they put the text together as a whole. You don't want to just be zooming in all the time and looking at little techniques like similes and metaphors. That gets very old and you're not going to stand out. The way to really analyze a text these days, I think, to impress a marker is to always be considering form. That is the kind of choice of voice and the narrative style and metatextuality, if that happens to be in there. It's always important. But with Mod A especially, looking at the divergence in form between two composers is very significant. Why has one composer produced their work in a slightly different way to the other? And what power does that have? What is the impact of that? To use an example of Tempest and Hagseed, for instance, you go from having a play, right, the dramatic form, to actually having a novelized adaptation. So you have a novel that actually allows, in that instance, Atwood, who is the author of Hagseed, to actually leverage this idea of prose fiction, or this formal element that is prose fiction, and actually give greater context to the characters that you can't really get with a dramatic performance.
That's right.
And it actually helps her to humanize the character that she's actually trying to create empathy for in that instance.
I guess what you're touching on is how form, especially in light of context, right, a greater psychoanalytic interest within individuals is enabled through her use of the narrative voice there.
Yes.
And one of the key meanings she's trying to enhance is the insight to the mindset of the characters, which, because a dramatic form is kind of separate in third person, right, we get this more objective view of all of the different characters. We can't be biased towards one particular character's mindset. And that's what she's trying to leverage, greater insight to a particular perspective. But I guess...
Although, I'll just add on that, I will push back on that a little bit, but the limited, third person limited in that instance,
yes,
it's offering a more objective view perhaps, but it actually is also privileging the perspective in that case of Felix, actually kind of helping to promote him as a character that should be empathized with rather than a tyrannical kind of character that, you know, could have been the interpretation of the original text. So she actually leverages a formal choice there that is third person limited to actually bias you to like Felix, because if you had just read the play The Tempest, you might have not liked him. That was a post-colonial reading of it would actually look at Prospero as this tyrannical dictator who actually took over the land and was obsessed with control, and a lot of people didn't like him after seeing that play. But if we read that novel, it's a more favourable impression for the reader, and that's really important.
And this is exactly what Textual Conversations is about, right? You're looking at how Atwood has now challenged or reshaped or deepened your understanding of a particular character through offering a new perspective. And that's really the heart of this module, irrespective of the particular text that you're studying. You're trying to show the marker, not that, okay, this text explores notions of control and so does this one, let me move on to my next thematic value. No, it's about the tensions between these two texts and how new and illuminating ideas arise through this process of textual dialogue, and you considering the dialogue between Atwood and Shakespeare, or Woolf and Daldry, or Plath and Hughes, right? Whichever module you are studying. One other point I'd like to add, though, is that point on form. It's not really only to enhance your essay, but just be aware that you may be asked specifically about context or form within an essay question. So it's something that you really need to engage with. It also facilitates your understanding of the two texts, as you can see in the conversation Jonny and I just had. A predominant value of an alteration in form means that new meanings can be enhanced throughout the text. So I really encourage you to make that central to your study.
That's right. And I'll add another point on the context issue in terms of, you know, being practical. You all need to draft an essay. You'll need to do an essay in the final HSC on Module A. When you construct the essay, it's very important that if you are to talk about any differences, any what they call dissonances or resonances between the texts, right? Let's just focus on differences for this point. If you were focusing on a distinction between one aspect of the original text and another aspect of the other text, you actually want to try and link that to context if possible and attribute those differences, maybe in thematic focus or in a particular perspective that's offered. You want to attribute that to something that has shifted in context between the original composition and the latter composition.
Yeah.
So if you find that something is presented in a different way in the second text versus the first text or the earlier text, you then want to try and figure out, depending on what you're talking about, what might be the source, the contextual source of that difference. And that's going to help you stand out. And that's a way that you show that you understand that with changes in time, as we move from one time to another, or with shifts in personal context, if we're looking at one person's perspective and then another person's perspective, like Platt Hughes, where it was still in a very similar time period there, but they were very different people, you understand that the shift in context there is actually what is causing a lot of the time the difference in representation.
Yes.
So it's very important to touch on that in your essay. Whenever you bring up a difference, what you then need to do is find a contextual element that you can link that to, and that will help satisfy, the requirements for a more sophisticated response.
Yeah, and it will also link back to the authorial intent, right? Because each of the composers are seeking to appeal to their contemporary reader, and that's very much so grounded in context as well. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right, guys. Thanks for watching. And please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehse.com.au, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.